Is your job search stuck? Maybe you're not getting any interviews with employers, or maybe you are, but no job offers. Or you may be new and not even know where to start. This is Charles Max Wood, and I'm releasing a new course and ebook on how to find a job as a software developer. The course walks you through the process of finding the types of companies you want to work for, getting their attention, and putting your best foot forward as the candidate they want. I've coached dozens of developers in looking for jobs and have been able to help several people find jobs within 2 weeks, 2 months. So whether you're new to development, can't find a great job that fits what you want, or are looking for remote work from an area without a strong tech community, I can help. Go to getacoderjob.com and sign up today. Hey everybody, and welcome to another My JavaScript Story. Our special guest today is Rob Eisenberg. Rob, do you want to say hi?
Hey, everyone.
Now, I'm trying to remember all the episodes we've had you on. We've definitely had you on Adventures in Angular.
Yep. And I think on JavaScript Jabber as well, although it's been a little while.
Yeah, we had you on episode 80. We talked about Aurelia on Adventures in Angular, and also on episode 9 of Adventures in Angular, we talked about Angular 2. Back when people were worried about Angular 2 because they posted all those headstones at, what was it?
Yes.
NG Europe or something? Yeah.
Yes, I remember. I remember well.
The good old days. Yeah, we've also had you on episode 203 of JavaScript Jabber talking about Aurelia. So
cool. Yeah, I can't. It's been over a period of like 4 years. Those podcasts that you're talking about. So I've forgotten half of it myself. Unfortunately, I'm getting older and my brain isn't working in that way anymore.
It's been a few years. I mean, both of those episodes, Adventures in Angular and JavaScript Jabber, were in 2016. Is there anything else that you've done that you want to just mention briefly that people might know you for before we jump in and start talking about your journey into programming?
I think maybe we'll probably cover, mostly I'm kind of known for different open source work that I've done over the years, and maybe we'll kind of hit on my progression through that world as we talk about my larger journey.
Yep, definitely. Well, let's go all the way back to the beginning of your journey then. How did you get into programming?
Yeah, so when I was about 8 years old or so, my father wanted to buy a personal computer. And so I remember going down to Sears with him at the time and buying the first couple of components of our Commodore 64. So for those that remember back then, there were you would buy the disk drive, and then you'd buy effectively the CPU, which was the keyboard looking unit. Those were different pieces you would buy, and you could optionally buy a monitor. At the time, we didn't have the money for that, so we had like this extra small black and white TV, right? And it was our first monitor. I remember going back down later with him when we had got the money to get like the dot matrix color printer and the 16 color monitor. But that's where my fascination with computers started. And back then, the place in the house that we had to even set the thing up was my bedroom. And so we set it up in there, and I'd play some games, and I just got fascinated by this notion that you could somehow type text into a thing and make it do stuff. And back then, I didn't know anyone that programmed. I didn't, this was the mid 80s. And so my father had a friend at work that got one of the early coding magazines. And when his buddy was done reading them, he would give them to my dad. He'd bring them home to me, and I would, copy the code out of those magazines, line by line into the Commodore with that blue background and typing out the line numbers. And that was Commodore Basic. And eventually I saved up my own money and I bought my first Commodore Basic programming book, and it was magical for me. I don't know how to explain it. There's some way in which I feel that my entire career as an adult software engineer has been trying to find my way back to that magical early world of kind of discovering programming. It was a lot of fun. I don't think people would really stand for it today. It's so tedious in retrospect, but as a kid, it was so fun to just type this stuff in and see what it would do. And it was just amazing creative outlet. And so that's how I first started. And at some point we got a a 286 with DOS on it, and I started learning about QBasic and QuickBasic, and so I moved along to doing that kind of stuff, which was pretty easy transition. It's just other flavors of BASIC, and then I heard about this language called C, and it was the ultimate,
Oh yeah.
you could do anything with C. And I remember going down to the public library because again, it's there was no internet, right? And there was no massive programming sections of bookstores, right? So I remember going down to the public library, and there were a total of 3 books, on C programming. And I checked every one of them out repeatedly and read them repeatedly. And here's the really funny thing: people will probably get a kick out of this, just because still I had no connections. I didn't know anyone that did this stuff. I didn't have a compiler.
Oh, really?
For my C program. So when I first started to learn C, I eventually solved this problem. I saved up my own money, and I ended up buying Borland compiler, a student license. But there was this period between there where I didn't have a compiler, and I literally learned to program by writing my programs on notebook paper. Like I would read the books, and then I would write them, and it seems so crazy today. But as a kid, this is like what I first started doing. Like I would kind of design out my programs and write code. I actually saved some of this stuff.
Oh wow!
So I have it like lying around in one place. I have some of my early like handwritten out programs, and I was really big into adventure games and things like that. And so eventually I started writing my own little adventure game engine, and I still have the that was in C++ when I moved on to C++, and I had a compiler and everything, and I still have the printout of all my source code back when we used to print out our source code. So it's so crazy to talk about it now, right? But back at the time, it was just the way me as a kid, again, not really knowing, eventually when I got into junior high school, there was like one other kid that I knew that was into this stuff, and we'd geek out on it. But, I still didn't really know anyone that their job was, I write software, right? So there was nowhere to go, and there was, again, still no internet, right? So, but it was a ton of fun. I mean, I spent so much time just trying to figure out stuff, probably stuff I wouldn't have patience to figure out anymore. But back then it was a lot of fun. And then I kind of, it was just really intense hobby of mine through high school. And then when I got to the end of high school, I kind of had to pick which path I was going to go. I had a couple of loves. One of them was computers and computer programming. The other one was music. I had started playing drums, actually. I was a percussionist, and I started when I was in junior high, and and then I started in high school. I started composing music. So I was composing for piano and some small orchestral music, actually, and things like that. And I had these 2 big loves, and it was a kind of a crisis of, do I go to one university and study music, or do I go to another one and study computer science?
Right.
And I'm sure people will think this very strange, but I literally asked God, what do I do? And I came to this conclusion to study music. And at the time, it was my family always supported me in what I did, but it was a very kind of odd decision, not very practical. On this side of it, though, it was absolutely the best decision that I ever made, because I studied music composition, and a lot of what I worked through in composing music and in music theory, I think has given me a very unique perspective on software design. When you're writing large-scale orchestral pieces, you're composing for dozens of instruments that all have to play at once to form some unified thing, and every piece, every note, every pitch, every rhythm, it all has to work together. Each thing is an individual thing, but it all combines to one thing. And everything in modern composition of music has to be justified, right? Why this note? Why that rhythm? So there's a very academic and rigorous aspect of it, but there's also an artistic aspect of it. And of course, in the end, humans experience this music.
Right.
And so I think there's a lot of parallels to how humans experience software, and then how that software is kind of put together out of so many pieces that form a unified whole, and the way that you kind of conceive of that process of constructing something like that. And so I ended up studying music composition and music theory at university, and I kind of stepped away from programming for a little bit. Although they had I was at Florida State, and they had a computer music tech program, like a certificate program that I did kind of on the side, but it was super lightweight. I took like one C programming class that I mostly didn't attend because I'd been there and done that already.
Right.
But so I went through this process of actually did 2 degrees in music, 2 bachelor's degrees, one in composition, one in theory, and then I started my master's work in composition. And along that point in time, I became kind of disillusioned with academia, in particular in music, and I started looking back at computers, and I thought, how can I use these things together? And a buddy of mine and I put together a video game music company, and we went to GDC, and we were composing music and trying to break into the game industry. That we totally failed at actually breaking in to the game industry, but it rekindled my passion for programming. I started again, like picking up some books on audio programming and DirectX audio programming and all kinds of things like this, and that kind of stepped me back towards programming again. At the time, I was my career was basically I was a music teacher. You know, I taught private music lessons, and I taught at some of the high schools. I taught drumline and different things like this. I had some still close connections with the university and a lot of the schools in the area that I was living. And I was trying to spin up this music thing on the side for video games, and that didn't work out. But I got back into programming, and one of my close friends said, "Hey, have you taken a look at this language called C#?" And I said, I don't know. I mean, how can it get any better than C++? I mean,
right?
C++ is, you know, I can do anything I want. You know, it's object oriented. I am and have always been just fascinated with object oriented design and the concepts and structures and object oriented programming. But one day I literally was in a bookstore. Now the bookstore is having actual, large computer programming sections by that point in time. This was around 2003. I picked up this book on it was like Teach Yourself C# in 24 hours, like one of those kind of books. And I was like, it was on sale, and it came with like the CD and everything. I was like, what the heck? And I took it home, and I was enthralled by how I had not worked in managed programming languages before, right? So Basic, I suppose, is its own thing, but most of my time had been spent in C and C++. So when I looked at C# and I was building some Windows applications at first, and I was comparing that back to like Borland's OWL and the Win32 APIs and all those things. It was just such a different world, and how it had changed in just a few years while I had kind of been through college and whatnot. And I just fell back in love with it again and started making stuff. And same friend that had got me into that said, well, I've got this opportunity. I'm working in this research and development wing of this small company, and we're rebuilding this product. And it's an ASP.NET web app. This was .NET 1.1. And he said, we don't have a ton of money. They could probably only pay you like part-time. Basically working out of this bed, the spare bedroom in this guy's house, right? But I was like, yeah, let's do it, And worked on that project for about 2 years. And the fun thing about that is that was actually the first time I started doing web programming was on that, because I had paid very little attention to HTML in kind of like in the late 90s. When I was finishing up high school. I graduated high school in 98. So
you are so old.
So
I graduated in 98 as well.
I paid no mind to HTML at the time because this can't do what I want,
right.
And so in the early 2004, we were building this crazy web app that was fully skinnable, that it was totally modular, that the end user could plug in different modules, and it was basically like a CMS mixed with, I don't know, it had workflows, all kinds of stuff. And we built just so much crazy tech as part of this between 2004 and 2006. We actually built our own scripting language. We built an XML-based declarative UI language with data binding. And so the solution had like workflows you could define at runtime that would then put these dynamic forms in front of people that were written with this XML-based markup language that had data bindings against the dynamic model and all this kind of stuff. And as part of this, I had to build the design tools for the people that would configure this app for their end users. And this was before the term Ajax was even coined. Back then, the circles I was in, I guess we called it a silent postback. So I built this Ajax-based front end tech for doing WYSIWYG design of all this stuff. And that's really when I started to see the power of what could be done in a browser client side. That would have been like, that was 2004, 2005. And so very different world still from today in terms of JavaScript. But if you worked like crazy to deal with the weird things in browsers, you could make some pretty amazing stuff happen even back then.
Yeah, I'm curious. As you made this transition, you got into .NET, C#. I'm curious. You start making this transition to web. What was it about web that finally roped you in? Because when I was playing with HTML in high school, it was like, this is fun. This is a toy. This isn't. I'm not going to do anything serious with this. And it sounds like by 2004, 2005, you were fully bought in. So what changed?
I'm not sure if I was fully bought in, but I started to kind of realize the power at that point in time. However, what was also happening at that point in time is Microsoft was working on Windows Presentation Foundation, which was this XML declarative-based vector graphics, hardware accelerated UI framework, So I was also kind of falling in love with that simultaneously, just because of the crazy things you could do graphically with it and how easy it was to do some of these things. And it had data binding. And so there was some cross-pollination between that and the work we were doing on the web. But I really ended up getting into WPF. Who became my business partner, he and I wrote one of the first books on it. And actually that's when I actually started writing the first front-end framework that I had ever done. So I've kind of been in this space of front-end framework development since 2004, 2005. 2005, I started working on something called Caliburn, which was this front-end framework for Windows Presentation Foundation, because WPF had this amazing graphics capabilities, but it turned out when you went to build real applications with it, there was tons of boilerplate. People often ended up building things that were impossible to unit test. There were just a lot of practical challenges in building a real app. And so I built a framework basically that was inspired by Ruby on Rails for building Windows desktop applications.
Oh, interesting.
That would let you build things with these pure view models that we used. This was kind of, again, around when people first started talking about the MVVM pattern, model view model. That was around 2005. And so I built a framework around these ideas and shipped a bunch of software. And then Silverlight came along, and that was, so these are the things that like distracted me from the web, basically, is what I'm getting at. So Silverlight kind of came along, and that was like WPF, but in the browser. And there was a big promise around that, which ended up not, coming to light. And so when Silverlight died, I said, forget this native, platform specific stuff. And that's at the point when I really, really invested in the web. I came kind of back to JavaScript for a second time and said, I'm going to really dig deep and learn this language with the same intensity that I had learned C++ or C#. And I'm going to try and take what I learned on the desktop, building front end stuff on the desktop, and see did it make sense for any of this to live in the browser? Because I knew the same problems essentially in application development were going to be there. So it was kind of a matter of, well, what does that look like on the web? How does that translate? And then I started working on something called Durandal, and that was roughly in the same time that AngularJS was coming on the scene as well. So 2009, 2010, actually started on it in 2008, but it was for my own personal project, a business thing that I was doing on the side. I think it was 2009, 2010 when I first talked publicly about that. And that's when the JavaScript frameworks were really first starting to come on the scene. Ember was around, AngularJS was around, and Durandal came around. Those weren't the first frameworks. There were stuff like Sprout Core and whatnot before that. But they started around that time frame to kind of become known, become a thing. Those are the early days of that. And yeah, my career is kind of been centered around this open source work that started back in 2005 with this Caliburn WPF framework and the evolution of those ideas onto the web and through various frameworks. And so I worked on Durandal, and then when I was preparing to kind of do the V next to that, I ended up getting connected with the Angular team. And that's when I worked with them for about 10 months on Angular 2 and plus, I guess I'll say.
Yeah, I remember you were doing some work on the router and things like that.
Yep.
With them. You were on the core team.
Yeah. A lot of the work I did on that router for Angular came from the router from Durandal, which was inspired by a bunch of things that we called screen activation patterns, which came from Caliburn going back to 2005. So there was this transgression. Maybe it was a transgression. There was there was this transition over the years of how these ideas had evolved. Just kind of looking at how people build screens and switch between screens and how users move through apps and all the conditions around that. And it started way back in Caliburn with these patterns we called screen activation patterns, and we had a bunch of names for them for different kinds of combinations and transactional screen things that would happen, and that just kind of carried forward and transformed into what you see. Actually, if you look at almost any router today, you'll see a lot of these kinds of patterns now in those routers. So I think it was kind of cool being part of the Angular team at that time, because I was able to kind of bring some of those ideas into that group, and then that kind of also fed other people with new ideas as well.
Right.
And then Aurelia came after that, which was me kind of returning to Durandal more or less, and kind of rebranding it and picking up where I'd left off, and that's where I've kind of been in the open source space for the last 4 years. And right now we're working kind of on our V next of that. And so those are the kind of the ways that people would know me, is just through the progression of open source front end framework work over the years, and did a lot of consulting around front end, and now I work at InVision as a principal engineer on InVision Studio, doing a lot of kind of architectural work around the front end of that app. So I just adore, I'm not a designer, right? But I absolutely adore UI and UX and bringing that to life, and how to make that easy for engineers, how to enable people to write clean code and testable code and maintainable code in the context of these complex and increasingly complex user interfaces that support all kinds of interactions.
That makes sense. I'm a little curious. I remember you were on the Angular core team, and then, like you said, you left and you started working on Aurelia. What was that transition like? Into
Aurelia, or?
Yeah. Especially from Durandal, where it kind of already had somewhat of a following, and you rebranded it. And
a lot of the people from Durandal came along into Aurelia because it was very much in the same line of thinking. In fact, there are people using Aurelia today that used Caliburn back in the day. So there's this community of people that I pulled along through this progression with me over the years, who just kind of agreed with me around particular values and principles in the framework and methodology for designing software, where these frameworks really resonated with them and helped them build things in the way that they wanted to build them. And so they saw, and a number of these people, what they saw in Caliburn or in Durandal, they also saw in Aurelia. And so it was very natural for them to kind of come along for the ride, so to speak. There was a lot of community building. Open source, now I've been doing it for 13 years, and I've had to learn a lot about how to do that over the years. A lot of mistakes. I've almost burned myself out a number of times. I've almost gone bankrupt a number of times. And so it's trying to learn about how to run a marathon instead of a sprint. What does it look like to be involved in open source over a long period of time and to continue to run that race without burning out, either physically or destroying yourself financially. The funding for open source projects is much better today than it was, 10 years ago or something like that.
Right.
It's still not where it needs to be. But I've known not just myself, but other open source developers that have worked on libraries or frameworks that were absolutely critical for many, thousands and thousands of companies, where the person leading the project ended up in a financial state of disaster almost,
Yeah.
And that's not uncommon, and it's a real challenge. So I've kind of had to, thank God I never went bankrupt, but I got really close a few times and got, like I said, really close to burning completely out a few times, and kind of had to learn those lessons. And then also you just learn so much about working with people and communities as well. And the more popular something gets, the more variety of people will come at it, and not everyone's always pleasant.
On the internet, I have no idea what you're talking about.
So learning to, there's an aspect of kind of learning to stay true to what you believe is the vision of the framework or library that you're working on, and not being pulled this way or that way from, people that disagree with you. And it's fine for people to disagree, I think if you look at the major kind of JavaScript frameworks today, more or less, they're all can get you to the same end result. And so then it comes down to more of a question of what are the different opinions or approaches that they take, and how does that mesh with your specific team, your specific product. And so it's become even more important to me over the years that we stay true to kind of our core values and vision around Aurelia, because that's, a few of those things are what makes it really unique, and why you would pick that instead of something else, maybe,
Yep.
Yeah, so I don't know, that feels really long-winded, but that's been my journey from Commodore 64 to JavaScript framework. And it's been fun. It's fun to look back on it, and I'm really envious of people today that want to kind of get into this space, because it's just so many resources on the internet. You can open up a web browser and learn and code in the browser, just about anything. And it's fun and exciting time, and it's very empowering, I think, if you're a creative person.
So one other thing I want to ask is what are you working on now?
Yeah, so my day job, I work at InVision, and I work on a product called InVision Studio, which is a screen design tool. And it's for designers and developers that are, like I said, it's for designing screens. So any app that lives on any kind of screen, right? Whether it's a phone or a watch or a TV screen or your desktop computer. So that's what I work on during the day, and then at night I work on Aurelia, and we're actually pretty deep into our vNext implementation of Aurelia, and it's been super, super exciting to watch that grow. We've moved to TypeScript, and we've done a lot of work to make it smaller, make it faster, build it in a way that's easier for the community to be involved. Really extensive focus on tests. I think as of this week, we've got 90% test coverage now on it, and that's over 42,000 unit and integration tests. So I'm really, really excited about the work that we're doing there, because I think we're going to have one of the coolest pieces of tech, and not just capable and cool, but validatable and trustable, through all the testing work that we're doing. So that's something I'm super excited about, and super excited about InVision Studio that I'm working on at InVision where I work, which is just an amazing product for, like I said, for designing apps, and kind of fits into this bigger InVision ecosystem we have too of collaborating around app design. That's my plug for the company I work for. I really think anyone building stuff in front end should be using our tech just to collaborate and design their software. It's transformative for how you build your front ends.
Yeah, I've talked to a couple of people over there. I'm trying to remember names, and I'm drawing a blank, but I'm pretty sure we've had people from InVision on the show, and Anyway, it's terrific and interesting technology.
Yeah, I have. It's a great group of people too. That's building it. Everyone's super passionate about the space and really of a mindset to kind of transform how we all collaborate. Between developer, designer, and product. How we all kind of work together to produce these experiences for our customers. So very very fun stuff. Very cool stuff.
Yeah. What's coming in Aurelia V next? What kinds of things are you working on there?
Yeah, so it's interesting with VNext, we're trying to maintain as much backwards compatibility as we can. One of the characteristics of Aurelia has been that it tries to get the framework out of your way, so that you don't see a lot of the framework code in your app code. So it's very unobtrusive. There are simple conventions, and so one of the things we're doing with VNext is because the framework is already kind of out of your way so much. We're looking to see, can we literally keep the same templating language, the same binding language, the same conventions, the same decorators, effectively all the same high-level APIs that represent 80% of what you interact with, but change the implementation under the hood so that you don't learn anything new, basically, in terms of the new templating language or binding language or whatnot. You don't have a whole lot of new stuff to learn, and your stuff can migrate very easily. But the way that it's implemented now is much more efficient, smaller, faster, architectural improvements. So we've made the entire framework a lot more pluggable down to the compiler level. So you can plug into the compiler and extend syntax and all kinds of stuff as a fully supported extensibility point. So it's just uber extensible. I mean, extensibility was always a big thing with Aurelia, but we've kind of taken it up to the next level here. And like I said, it's smaller, it's better performing. We've had a lot of focus on quality with the testing strategies that we're putting in place. And the other thing Aurelia has always been good at is web standards. But again, we're trying to take that up to the next level. So a lot of our stuff now, if you look in our expression parsers or in our binding engine, you'll see all these references to specific parts of what WG or ECMA specifications where we've implemented things exactly to match others, the specifications. So we're really working very, very hard so that, for the most part, when people learn Aurelia, the bulk of what they're learning is web standards as well. So their knowledge and experience there transcends the framework. So frameworks will inevitably come and go. If you're going to be a web developer over a long, long period of time, it's been my belief is that the most important thing you can do is to invest in the standards of the web itself. And so Aurelia kind of takes that approach too, where it tries to get out of your way, tries to orient itself around standards so that you learn a lot of the web standard stuff in the process. And so we're just kind of taking that up a notch. Again, unobtrusiveness, conventions, these are all part of the current version of Aurelia, but in VNext, again, we're going even further. Like, could we get the decorators out of your code? Like, could we actually make conventions an extensibility point of the framework where, we ship with a default set of conventions for how to put things together. But if you want to, you can teach the framework your own set of app-specific conventions. This is kind of in line with the philosophy that I'm a big believer with, that I heard Bob Martin kind of talk about a whole lot, which is that most frameworks are kind of built with this mentality that your application should plug into the framework. And really that's putting the framework in the position of power, right? Dictating how you build your app. But ideally, the framework should plug itself into your app. Your app should be able to have the architecture that makes sense for it, and it should not be, it should control the framework, right? And so a lot of what we're doing with Aurelia is in that spirit of keeping the framework out of your app as much as possible, and then giving you the power to basically say, here's how I want to write my app. Let me teach the framework about the way that we're writing our app, and then let the framework plug into your app in that way. All these things have kind of been core to Aurelia always, but with our VNext, we're just kind of taking them up to the next level. We're trying to push them even farther. We've always had great performance, but we're going to have better performance. We're going to have better size. We have a great community, but what can we do to make the code base more approachable so that it'll be easier for them to get involved and to contribute. So we're doing a lot around documentation, and not just consumer documentation, if you will, for people building apps, but engineering documentation for people that actually want to dig in and work on it.
Right.
To understand what are the architectural decisions that were made inside the framework and why, and these kind of things. So that's kind of the work we're doing with vNext, to kind of take it to the next level of each of the core things that I think that it's already good at in its present version, but how can we push those farther and bring the community along in a way that doesn't involve massive rewrites or massive having to learn new things.
Right.
And it's coming along swimmingly, actually. I'm super excited about it. It's not quite in an alpha phase yet, so I wouldn't want anyone to go build anything with it, but we're getting really close. And like I said, we've already got 90% test coverage and over 40,000 tests representing that. And that is most of the major features of the framework in. So now we're just kind of getting the edge cases and polishing and making sure we've got the APIs exactly the way we want them. Those kind of things, bringing online the plugins that people, like router and validation and internationalization and all those other kind of things that make an end-to-end solution. So we're kind of bringing those pieces in now. And I think it's going to be exciting. I think it's going to be really cool for the community. And I think a lot of people that haven't looked at Aurelia, or maybe looked at it a few years ago, it's going to be time for them to kind of take a new, fresh look at that version of it, because I think it's going to be pretty darn cool.
Very cool. Well, let's get you on JavaScript Jabber to talk about it.
Yeah, I'd love to.
I think I mentioned when we were talking before the show that we're booked out for recording dates until like January.
Yeah.
So that means that we're probably looking at like a late February release, but it sounds like that's about good timing for you.
Yeah, that'd be great. I mean, I'm hopeful that if we did something around that time, people would be able to listen to the show and then go actually play with some of the new stuff.
Right.
So.
Yeah. So we'll see if we can get that lined up, and that way people who are interested in Aurelia can go see, oh, this is all new stuff. This looks great. Yeah, and just figure out, what solutions it feels the need for.
Definitely.
All right. Well, one last question. If people want to find you online, where do they go?
I am Eisenberg Effect on Twitter and just about everywhere else. So they can find me there through any of the Aurelia channels. They can find me as well. That's where I spend most of my time. So, yep.
One other question that I have for you is, do you have a blog or a website that people can go hit?
My personal blog is eisenbergeffect.bluespire.com, but I don't publish there very often. Okay. Mostly I'm publishing through the Aurelia blog, which is blog.aurelia.io. We have posts there every couple of weeks, I think. Not all of them by me, just by different core team members, and we have community members that we invite as well. But that's where that's what I'd check out.
All right, sounds good. Well, I'm going to start heading us toward wrapping up, and that means picks.
Do you run your own freelance business? Or maybe you're thinking about picking up some business on the side? Well, then you need FreshBooks. FreshBooks is the quickest and easiest way to get invoices out to your clients. It's easy to use. It works anywhere, available from any device, on the desktop, iPhone, iPad, Android, and all of your data is backed up and secure. And it makes it really easy to get organized and get paid. You'll be tracking time, logging expenses, and invoicing your clients in no time. You can also save time billing, freeing up several days per month to focus on the work that you love, and you get paid faster. FreshBooks customers are paid on average 5 days faster because there's a link on the invoice that says pay me now. And it's a great way to grow your business. Plus, FreshBooks is offering a 30-day trial. That's right, 30-day trial if you try them out. So go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section. Once again, for a 30-day trial, go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section.
Do you have some things you want to shout out about on the show?
Sure. I've really been getting into decentralized apps, or dApps. I'm not sure if you've had anyone on the show talking about that kind of stuff, but this is all the tech related to building apps on the blockchain and PFS. And so my first pick is a little database called OrbitDB, which is a database built on top of IPFS for building dApps with. And it uses CRDTs, which are, I'm not sure, again, how familiar people are with those, but it just allows effectively synchronizing various versions of data across multiple clients correctly and consistently. And it's really, really cool research happening in the space. So check out OrbitDB if you are interested in dApp development. And so that's my technical pick. And I've got a couple more that are fun. I've got two young boys, and we like to play board games and card games, and I love role-playing games. There's a fun independent game called Robot Riddle, which is if you can imagine, a choose-your-own adventure book in a board game. Where you collaboratively kind of tell the story and go up against challenges, and it comes with little storybooks that you read through, and the kids can kind of do some basic role playing and storytelling, and it's a lot of fun. So if you have kids, my kids are pretty imaginative and like to tell stories anyways. It's a fun thing to do together with them. And the second one, which is kind of along the lines of kids stuff, is a series of books called the Wingfeather Saga, which is a fantasy series kind of aimed towards, I'd say ages 6 to 12. I read it to my kids, and we had a lot of fun. Really well written. It's multiple novels. Everything kind of very well tied together and very well told. And a lot of really good teachable moments, if you will, for parents throughout the books. Things to talk about, and as the main characters are kids and go through kind of each of their individual struggles through the adventure. So those are my picks: OrbitDB, Robot Riddle, and the Wingfeather Saga.
Nice. Yeah, I have a couple of role-play game type things that I bought. I used to play Dungeons and Dragons with Joe Eames, who's organizer of NGConf, and he's on JavaScript Jabber and Views on Vue and Adventures in Angular. And a couple of those, I'm just going to shout them out. I've read the book for the one. I haven't read through the book for the other because I just got it, but it's the same kind of thing as kind of a Dungeons and Dragons simplified for kids. And so you get a character sheet, and then you make them go through an adventure. The one is called Little Wizards. And I've been looking forward to playing that with my kids. I'm not sure what ages your kids are, but my oldest is 12. He's almost 13. And my youngest is 2.
So you got a big gap there.
Yeah, there's a gap between my youngest and second youngest. So my next youngest is 7.
Gotcha.
So
mine are 8 and 9, basically.
Yeah. So I have a 12-year-old, an 11-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a 7-year-old that would all play these games. And looking forward to that. But yeah, I've been super busy. I haven't taken the time to do it. But yeah, so it's fun. It takes place on Coin World is what they call the world. And yeah, it seems like a really just fun way to go. And yeah, the thing that I like is, again, like you said, it gives the kids a chance to tell a story and, kind of explore, how people can interact. And yeah, so I'm excited to do that. Incidentally, my wife and I planned a trip next week. So my kids have fall break, and we're going up to Park City, Utah, which is where the Olympic training area is. It's also where the Sundance Film Festival is held. Yeah, we're just going to go up there for a week, and so we'll probably, not quite a week. We're going up Wednesday night after they get out of school, and we're coming back Monday night. So, yeah, that'll be fun. And we just booked a condo on VRBO. And it's funny because Airbnb has been hit or miss for me, but VRBO has been ultra consistent. And so I've been really happy with that. I got a VRBO also when I went up for Framework Summit, which was also in Park City. And yeah, I got into a really nice place for not a lot of money. I was like 10 minutes from the conference. And yeah, just really had a terrific time. And so I'm also going to pick Park City. So if you ever come out to Utah, Salt Lake City's got a bunch of stuff to do downtown, which is fun. Temple Square and some of the other stuff downtown is definitely worth seeing. But Park City is just beautiful. And it's kind of all spread out across a couple of different areas, and all of those different areas have something different to offer. If you come up in the winter and you're a big skier, a lot of those areas, they either offer shuttles to the ski lifts, or some of them, they feel like they're right in town, but they're literally walking distance to ski lifts. So anyway,
cool.
But yeah, so lots of fun stuff. Thanks for coming, Rob.
Hey, it's my pleasure. I'm glad we finally were able to connect.
Yep. Yeah, things have been a little bit nuts, but yeah, we'll get back to it. And yeah, we will catch everybody next week.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.